Hello, everyone. We are here. PennLive is here with some of our readers to talk about a very important topic for our community. And that is whether recreational, not medicinal, but recreational marijuana should be legalized. And we have people who clearly know a lot about the subject and others who just want to talk and are concerned. So let's go to our readers and ask them what they think about this issue. So hello everyone. Good afternoon. Good evening, right? Good evening. So clearly American society, we've all lived through the debate over medicinal marijuana. And I think society has shifted toward accepting that this drug can be used for medical purposes, to ease pain, to help people overcome illness. But now we're talking about something a little bit different. We're talking about using it recreationally. And in much of the country, it's still illegal. Do you sense that society is moving toward acceptance of marijuana as a recreational drug? How about we start with our detective from Steelton?
Mike? Yes.
Tell us who you are and why this is an important issue for you.
Detective Troy AlHajj. I'm a Steelton police officer. I've been an officer for 21 years. So just in my career, absolutely, it's definitely something that's a big thing that we deal with as police officers. So we're already in the process of trying to make it decriminalized in Steelton, and I support it. I think that it's with regulations like alcohol. There should be an adult to use it. I don't know what other regulations could be with it. Not to drive intoxicated. So things like that would be important.
Now, how did Steelton's work through this process? Was there a lot of debate, a lot of people confronting each other over this issue? How did you guys work through it?
Unfortunately, I wasn't part of all that. I know that it came up, and it went through our borough council pretty quickly. So it seems like there wasn't a lot of roadblocks in the way.
Okay. How about anyone else? How do you think? Is society moving toward this? Go right ahead. David.
Yeah, I do believe society is moving towards it. I disagree with it vehemently. And there are several reasons that I was discussing beforehand. Number one, it is considered a gateway drug. And I know people cringe when they hear that. But you don't hear people saying, gee, I think I'll go out and start shooting up heroin. They start with a lesser drug. It's normally marijuana. Marijuana is much more potent than it used to be in the 70s. The levels of THC, whatever the ingredients are much more potent. So it's more powerful. There's been medical studies that say it increases the element of psychosis in people, and they see a decrease in the intelligence of people over extended use of marijuana.
That point you made about it, and I think even the detective would agree, what's on the street these days, you don't know what you're getting. So the issue is, if it were legal, would you know what you're getting more than what you do now when you're just buying it on the street and could have fentanyl or something in it, right?
I guess you can rationalize it that way.
I'm not rationalizing, I'm just raising it.
That would be a way that somebody could rationalize it. But I just don't think that if we move into marijuana and legalize it, what's the next step? You know what? Let's legalize cocaine. That seems foolish. But the governor said before the election, I don't want to legalize marijuana for recreational use.
Representative, now, you obviously believe society is moving in this direction. Tell us why.
Well, 60% of Pennsylvanians have said that they believe adult use cannabis should be legal in this Commonwealth. We see across the nation, right now there are 10 states that are already adult use legalized cannabis. We have more states who are debating. Just today, we heard that the U.S. Congress is thinking about moving bills that makes this drug legal. This cannabis legal. I think some of the fear is associated with the stigma, but to your point earlier, right now on the streets, we don't know what people are getting. And citizens, adults and minors are getting their hands on this substance. What we are trying to do when we talk about legalizing adult use is bring it under the government's authority so that we can clearly educate people about what they are using, and we can keep it as best we can. We can keep it away from minors. So I think if you are a law enforcement person and you want to kind of keep this in order. We can control the THC levels under regulations if we had it as a legal substance.
Well, that's another question. I mean, how widespread, I don't want to sound naive, is marijuana usage now as a recreational drug? I mean, you guys see it. Is it widespread or is it not?
Willing to talk about this.
I mean, are people doing it no matter what?
I mean, so I'm originally from Pittsburgh. I'm from the South Hills. It's very, you've seen the movie Pleasantville, you know, it's lily white, upper class. And I went to college, mixed at Penn State, so I mixed with every socioeconomic background. I work now with every socioeconomic background. Once you go outside and start talking to people in all these bubbles, I'm Christian, I'm married, I have a 3-year-old, I smoke pot. I was raised in a Christian household. I have a well-paying job. Do I do it now? No, it wasn't for me. But do I know people in everyday society who are well-respected, who do it in the comfort of their own home? Absolutely. Do I know people who it started as a gateway drug and unfortunately due to their economic and addictive personalities, did it become their gateway drug? Absolutely. But on a whole, I think I've come across more everyday people who don't abuse it, just like alcohol. They don't abuse it. They fall within the laws. And I feel with this issue as a parent, it's coming down the track sooner or later. And I'd rather know that we're going to get education out there about it and, you know, good boundaries for legalization, that when my child does become 18 and 19 years old, and that's presented to him or sooner, you know, kids will make their own decisions. He's well informed and he knows he can buy it at a safe place. You know, if he does struggle with it, where he can get help for it. And let's be honest, there's a, you know, economic benefit from taxing it. You know, you guys just posted an article about the trouble we're having with the turnpike. A suggested solution was the legalization and taxation of it. I understand, you know, it's a new cultural shift, but with education, we can address some of those fears, and we have to be willing and open for it. And as far as the medical community, all that research is still so new. And addressing the intelligence factor, it is proven that if you start early in your teens and in your early 20s, the IQ deficit is around 6 to 8 points. But in adults, there has been no study that has found any significant use. So, you know, if we can beat this and legalize it and regulate it, we might be able to address some of those concerns with the IQ level and everything like that.
Okay, I want to come back also. We're going to talk about the health impact, at least from what we know about it. But I want to ask the young people to get in here. We were just trying to think, really, how widespread is it now? I mean, and what are your thoughts on legalizing?
Hello, my name is Rodrigo Mirza. I believe that it's actually an inevitability that eventually recreational marijuana will become more apparent in the United States or become legalized because of the fact that we have a lot of advocacy. And I think that comes from the fact that it's just in our hands now. It's all over, it's all throughout the United States. And
see, that's what is a little concerning to me. You're saying it really is all throughout the United States, that it's easily obtainable, but it's not regulated. And as you pointed out, the former police officer, former state police officer, right? You don't know what's in it, right? Aren't you guys afraid of picking this up? You don't know what you're taking? Not that it's you, but your friends. Not you, but your other friends.
He's not admitting to it. Right.
I know a lot of people that actually... I would have to say maybe it's just like an honor system, a little bit of trust. We all know what it can do, and we just know people, and we can trust people that they're not.
So you know the source of where you're getting.
And I personally believe that. Well, from what I've met, all the people I've met, and I'm young, I haven't seen where these people are going later down their line. As of now, I don't see them turning into like a heroin junkie or anything like that. As of now, they just seem like another student, another person in society.
How about you, young man?
Hello, my name's Dale. So I think that, yeah, I agree with Reed that it is going to be kind of inevitable that it will be legalized. It's just a matter of when, especially with the increased push for the legalization of medical marijuana. And because of that, I think it's important that it is legalized recreationally sooner rather than later, because I think the greatest threat to our society right now is the fact that the dangers that are associated with recreational use of marijuana are associated with use at a young age. And if it's better controlled and it's available by people, sold by people who are trustworthy, actual people in people with an actual business rather than someone on the street corner, it can be more safely obtained by the people who are going to use it, whether it's legal or not.
Is that part of the reason why you're looking to legalize it, because of the concern that the danger that it poses now for young people?
I mean, it's partly. The other motivation for me was to try to right the wrongs of the failed war on drug. And we are trying to also use this as a criminal justice and a social justice issue, because those who have been who've been caught with this in some form or capacity, they've lost a lot of years of their lives. So we are using this also as a way to kind of right those wrongs. I just want to address them. Mm-hmm. There are current research coming out that says most of these states that have gone and legalized adult use cannabis, they've seen a decrease in utilization by teenagers and minors, primarily because it takes away the kind of the stigma of I'm doing something illegal, right? And it makes it less of a sexy drug or drug of choice. And
if your grandmother's using it.
Yeah, you don't want to be sitting there. So we're seeing that. So again, from that point and perspective, I think we would want to bring it under the authority of the state and allow for the state to try to really address it in a way to keep it out of the hands of minors.
Brandon, yes, go ahead. And Brandon, I know you want to comment on that.
When I came, I was against legalization of recreational use. I was that it causes mental illness, the psychosis, and that the developing brain, and that youth might want to use it more because it's cool. But I was persuaded by Diane.
Okay.
About
Two moms?
I was persuaded about it. But my concern is that I like it that you would get the education for people on substance use disorders and education about not using it, and then the restrictions about the age at which someone could buy it. But I want to know how you would keep the illegal market. Because I'm thinking if the government taxes it, because I hear this thing about the money, I'm like, if they tax it too much, trying to get revenue, then what? Then there's going to be a black market, and that's going to be a problem too. So I think that if you're going to legalize it, you have to be realistic about the amount of tax money you want to generate.
That's a good point. Have you guys done any of that thinking in the legislature? And the other thing is, what age would you be legalized? Would it be 18 or 21?
21.
21.
You wouldn't be able to purchase this until you were 21 and above. We have talked about the illegal market, and our hope is what we would do is we would bring it in at a certain rate, and studies have showed you'd have to ramp it up after a couple of years. But once you break the habit of going to so there's other things we have to put in place. So for example, right now, even with the medical cannabis, we've seen a drop in prices for marijuana on the street right now. So we know that if you bring it in, we regulate it, and we are sensitive to how we're pricing it, that we can make it very competitive, because a lot of folk want to go somewhere where they're safe in what they're receiving. Now, will there still be a legal market? Probably. But you look at it from when we legalized lottery and the gambling, right? There's a numbers game out there. There's still a legal market of number runners, but they're not as prevalent. And so this is what we think will happen in this market as well.
Go ahead.
To be honest with you, I do believe the state will, if they do legalize it, regulate it to the maximum. They did the same thing with alcohol. I mean, we're a closed state. The state controls the sale of alcohol, the flow of alcohol. We used to work the border and arrest people for coming back into Pennsylvania without out-of-state liquor. It will be regulated to the point where you've got to look at everything from who's going to enforce it. Do you start a whole new marijuana bureau of investigations? What are the fines going to be? How do we control it? Do we license the stores to sell it? Do we license the manufacturers of it? What about the farmers that want to produce this? And if you look at this, if you look at the gambling industry, how much they regulated that. and how much it costs now for a license.
Sounds like a whole bunch of jobs to me. I'm hearing all these.
I realize that, it'll create jobs, it'll
Yeah.
decrease the price of it. Are these truly really good reasons to legalize it?
That's good. Well, let's talk a little bit more about your concerns, because I think we need to investigate the impact on health. I mean, that's important. Look, none of us, I think, can argue that alcohol doesn't have a negative impact, especially if we have one too many, right? And who hasn't, right? But the next question is, while we can argue that alcohol, when used moderately, has some health benefits, what about marijuana for recreational use? Not that you have a disease and you're treating it, but what are the health benefits from recreational use? And are we at all concerned about the potential negative mental effects of marijuana use? Yes,
I've
that's
never
where
heard
you
of
go.
health benefits.
You can come back. We'll come back to you.
Marijuana.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Diane Thatcher, and I'm from York County, and I am for legalization. I am a licensed caregiver for the state of Pennsylvania for medical marijuana. There are many people that are being helped with this plant. If we look at why this plant became illegal to begin with, I think that really answers all the questions here. Everything that was stated by each person that spoke here tonight is not why the plan is illegal. All right, the plan is illegal.
Go ahead, tell us.
Well, I'm going to let.
Yeah.
Okay, it was discrimination. It was a discrimination against African American people, against the Mexican people. The first person that was ever arrested for marijuana or cannabis, let's call it what it's really called, cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
Mongrel name is marijuana. Okay. It's cannabis, it's a plant, and there's a lot of studies done. Let's address psychosis, okay? We just started hearing about psychosis. Cannabis has been around for hundreds, thousands of years, okay? We're just now hearing about psychosis. Has our mental conditions increased as a result? We don't have any studies to say that. What I do know is correlation does not mean causation. So if you take psychosis and you really look into the studies of the silver lining in all of this, most, and I want to choose my words carefully, most people that suffer from mental illness have some type of an abuse of some type of substance or behavior. That's just that. So, does smoking marijuana cause the psychosis? Most likely not, is what the studies tell us. But do people gravitate to medicate with that, like they do with any other alcohol, nicotine, sugar, exercise? You can find a correlation in any type of study. The correlation in driving accidents in states that have been legal, they're not specific. So if you're a medical marijuana patient and you were legal and you were in an accident by someone who has run a stop sign and hit you, within that study, it's going to be included that marijuana was included as a substance in that accident. Did that cause the accident? No, it's a correlation. So I think we need to be really careful on our studies, our statistics when we start quoting this. We have 187,000 patients in the state of Pennsylvania right now. Are all of them really patients under all of 17 conditions? No. I believe it's a way. That's how many people really want this place legalized.
Yeah. Let me delve one thing that you said. I want to make sure, because I do think most of the people in the room, while they would approve or authorize legalization, would do so with some restrictions. But I thought I was hearing you say that maybe those restrictions aren't necessary for driving, or?
I think right now we need to legalize on the federal level. All right, we're talking state level,
right.
And what we have found in 10 states that are already legal, federal laws override where it comes to skilled nursing facilities, which I'm experiencing right now. One of the patients that I have right now is a 53-year-old Huntington's disease patient that's gone from assisted living, private pay, where he was allowed to be medicated there, off the med card, just like any other medication.
Right.
He went into skilled nursing. The meds were stopped immediately. Why? Because it's federally regulated.
I get it. So you wanted that, but the point that I was trying, would you have with restrictions as well?
I would,
Okay.
for only adult use
For
and
adult-
for funding of studies for things. What's the measurements for
And
people
for driving, you would-
Yes,
okay.
absolutely.
Could we ask the Representative Jake to tell us about the history, because she wanted to defer that one to you.
So back in the early 70s, the former Governor Schaefer of Pennsylvania was asked to lead a commission for President Nixon to look at this drug, because they were hearing that this drug had all these negative things and it was causing society some trouble.
Mm-hmm.
The commission came back after a couple years of examining the drug, and basically, I'm paraphrasing it, it basically says this drug, this plant is not a dangerous plant, and it should be treated like we treat alcohol. It should not be treated in a criminalized way. And by the way, it was put on a controlled substance temporarily until this commission was to finish its work. And the commission came back and said, look, it should be taken off the controlled substance list. And if you want to prevent people from gravitating to it, then we should use social means to prevent them, like we do with alcohol. Mm-hmm. Nixon wanted to have a way to target urban areas across the country. And this was his way to go into those urban areas and basically criminalize the youth, because he thought the youth in these areas were a threat to the country. And this is why he kept it on the controlled substance list, and he used it as a way to initiate what we see now is the failed war on drugs. And so it wasn't about the properties of the plant that caused people fear. It was really the fear of the people who they thought were using it.
So you're saying that there is some racial undertone to where we are. Well, I'm going to let Mark talk. I know Mark has, but you're saying there's some racial undertone to what's happened here. And I mean, we know there's a lot of young people in jail, right, for possession, right?
Clearly, when you look at the history of how this has began and it expanded, it was clearly one that was based around race. Now, what people will say is not just that.
Right.
But in the beginning, in this conversation, as this Nixon used it as a weapon to basically target.
Mark, you want to offer your thoughts on that?
Sure, yes. Thank you. I'll play the Kellyanne Conway and I'll give some alternative facts.
Okay.
At least my version with regard to Nixon and his war on drugs, that was Nixon's fight back against the counterculture on the college campuses across the country, the hippie culture, the drug use culture. They were attacking the president. They were surrounding the White House. They were leading protests and sit-ins, trying to remove Nixon from office. This was a big part of why Nixon engaged in the war on drugs, was to fight back against those.
So this was his political counterattack.
I think so, yes. But I wonder if we can approach the issue from the perspective not of legalizing recreational marijuana, but legalizing freedom.
Yes.
And I'm an adult.
That's an interesting concept.
I am as square as they come. I've never used marijuana. I might be the last one standing. I'm not hip or cool by any stretch of the imagination. And it's always something personally I was just repulsed by when I was a young child, and I've never gotten over that. I never will smoke marijuana, even if it is legalized. If heroin is legalized, I'm not going to shoot up with heroin. But don't I have the right, as a reasonable, rational adult, to smoke marijuana? It's not good for me, but the gin and tonic I'm going to have later tonight is not good for me. The jelly donuts I'm going to eat tomorrow morning are not good for me. And it already is a crime in Pennsylvania to operate a motor vehicle with the slightest trace of a non-prescription controlled substance in your blood. So it already is a crime to get behind the wheel after having consumed a marijuana joint, and the metabolites can be in your system for 30 or 60 days. You get pulled over and you go to jail. And the last point is, well, two quick points. One, the war on drugs. Of course, I used to work for the Attorney General of Pennsylvania as a speechwriter and a policy guy. I probably have written 200 speeches on the war on drugs and how we're going to crack down on drugs and we're going to end the epidemic of drugs in America. That's been an abysmal failure. There are more drugs and more marijuana smoking in Pennsylvania and America today than there were when Nixon started the war on drugs. So can't we just face facts? It's failed. And there are so many negative collateral consequences to the war on drugs. Massive incarceration of whole groups of people, violations of the Fourth Amendment, our civil liberties, civil asset forfeiture, our constitutional rights being infringed when the government gets all ramped up to fight these wars that have failed and will never win them. So why can't we just confront reality and legalize recreational marijuana for adults in Pennsylvania?
Oh, Mark, I think that Brandon, you wanted to offer something there. And then I want to, once the microphone gets in, I want to come back and really talk about something that Mark brought up, which is so many lives have been shattered by this. So many people are incarcerated or have been damaged by this. What do we do to rectify that? But Brandon, go ahead.
So I know, Mark, you made a declaration that you would never smoke, but I would suggest to you to try edibles when it does.
Do you have a business you're going to
Colorado, California. But no, to your point too. Also, have to look at young people too. So obviously, we know about the demographic that's been criminalized, but I think one thing that we don't pay attention to is even within our schools. There's a former deputy commissioner, a gentleman by the name of Kevin Bethel, who used to be the deputy commissioner in Philadelphia. He now partners with Drexel University, and he goes statewide to institute school diversionary programs. And I can speak, to that directly. The first time I ever went to a juvenile detention center was because of an incident that happened at school with a police officer. So the premise of the school diversionary program is there are a lot of, I would call them venial sins that occur within the confines of school buildings that could be resolved and mediated without the need to have police department involved. But that oftentimes takes a lot of time and energy, and the easy fix is just to have the police officer come and lock the young person up. The two main offenses that they said that they find, it doesn't really matter which school district, whether it's urban or rural, is simple assault, meaning fighting amongst your peers, and then secondly, drug possession. So whether it's a joint, kids smoking on the way to school, or whether it's paraphernalia, those are the two main offenses.
And those are children,
yes,
right?
These are
under the age of 18. So you're telling me throughout their schools, they have access to marijuana that is not regulated and that just off the street.
Right. So that goes back to your point about how widespread it is. Certainly it is very much widespread, and not even just amongst kids, even my own professional colleagues as well. You'll be surprised. I'm not going to name any names. But
it's still illegal.
But even entering the criminal justice system. So one other finding that they found. One other finding from that study and from this program is that they said usually kids who aren't, who have never been involved in a criminal justice system, once they enter that system, especially if they go to intermediate to long-term placements, that's when they become hard, because that's when they spend a great deal of their time around other kids that are.
And many of them enter the system through marijuana.
Right. So.
Yeah.
It's important that we look at this through that context as well.
So let me ask our officers, is there any understanding these days when you're pulling people over, this is so widespread, and that, what do you do?
I think there's...
Get your microphone. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry about that. I think there is definitely some leeway that officers have to say, you know what, on your way, just throw it out. without any other legal ramifications. But you were getting back to all the lives that it has destroyed because of being arrested and entering into the criminal justice system. I do agree with that. Part of the problem is these lessons begin at home, and people need to know, hey, you can't do that. It's illegal. It's against the law. And we have a tendency to make excuses for people who break the law, and I think that's wrong too. And you said about destroying lives. The use of marijuana, again, goes to a gateway drug. You start with marijuana, they get some pretty potent stuff, and then they think, I need a better high. They go to cocaine, they go to heroin. So that is destroying lives also.
Detective AlHajj?
I think definitely one of the biggest things that we have to use in law enforcement is officer discretion. So I can say that I've stopped cars several times, and my interaction with the driver is usually I'm looking to see if he's intoxicated. You look for signs of impairment. If it doesn't seem to be signs of impairment, absolutely we can, and still we have a summary violation for paraphernalia on the books now. So there's a lot of times they get away with just getting a ticket and giving a ride home if we feel that maybe they shouldn't be driving.
Right.
So we have a lot of discretion in that
So
area.
we've seen a change in the attitude of law enforcement as well. Do you, or is that just instilled?
I think it's just instilled, and I don't think there's other municipalities that also have a summary violation for paraphernalia. It's usually a misdemeanor in other jurisdictions.
I see. Yes.
I have a question.
Wait till the microphone comes.
To me.
Kind of.
Okay.
It's gonna have to come. We're gonna have to do two microphones.
I'm concerned about, Mark said about if you're impaired. Well, how do you determine someone's impaired with marijuana? I mean, alcohol, they can do a breathalyzer, and but how do you, on the spot, decide that?
You can't.
Maybe.
Good luck on that one.
So impairment is very similar to alcohol with marijuana. It's very similar. There's going to be signs of being unable to have good judgment, things we talk, interaction with the person that's driving the car, maybe his imbalance when we ask him out of the car to, and we would go through certain tests just like we do with DUI for impairment. Walk and turn test, touch the finger of the nose. You're going to be uncoordinated and not be able to drive a vehicle if you're so high, on marijuana. So we can tell. And then ultimately,
this lady hasn't spoken about. Yeah.
They would be taken, if we do think that they're under the influence and can't drive, they would be taken to the processing center, and we'd withdraw blood and determine where their levels are at for accuracy.
Got it.
I understand that the DUI thing is very, as it should be, very important. It's, we're obviously very cognizant because of alcohol. I'm a motor vehicle paralegal. I am the person you come to when you're in a car accident. And for my past 5 years being in this sector, I can tell you that most of my major accidents, the marijuana isn't on there. If it is in there, there's still always going to be alcohol. In our firm, I personally have not come across a case where this, vehicular homicide was called explicitly by marijuana use. And most studies show that, yes, if there is pot, it's coupled with another substance. So I definitely understand that fear. I see my clients on a daily basis who either they can't sit across from me and it's their estate, or they have horrific injuries from a DUI. And after 5 years of seeing this, if I can sit here and say the idea of legalizing pot doesn't scare me, meanwhile, still a cell phone in the hand of a teenager scares me more than pot.
While driving.
While driving.
Right.
I think but that's my personal experience. That's why I know this argument of what about the driving isn't as scary, because in my line of work, where they normally see you first and then I get a call, is because it's the alcohol or a cell phone or distracted driving. And if we want to make sure pot, marijuana, whatever we're going to call it, isn't, then we need to educate. And how do we do that? We legalize it, get the funds available, and get it out there and get in the schools like we did with cigarettes. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what I feel. But I really feel like we could address the DUIs, because I feel like that's a huge thing coming up by person, and that's something that could easily be addressed by going to schools and talking to parents if that's, and driving under the influence is such a huge issue in the legalization debate.
I think Mark wants to say something, but Mark, also, would you address for me and other people too? I mean, is this going to make it any easier or harder for us to keep it out of the hands of kids if it's legalized? I mean,
that's a great question. I want to make 2 quick points, and I'll ask the representative to remind me to commend the General Assembly if I forget. But I don't want to get too much into the weeds, so to speak, on the driving while impaired issue. But I've done a lot of criminal defense cases over the years. What often happens now is an individual might have several drinks or too many drinks of alcohol. He is impaired. He's stopped. The field sobriety tests are taken. The blood is drawn, and they find a non-prescription controlled substance in the blood. And so that becomes an add-on charge to your standard typical DUI charge. The problem is it gets the most severe penalties because it's a drug, because it's marijuana or whatever it is. And now you're ratcheted up to the 3rd tier, the most severe penalties, even though it's highly unlikely the marijuana from 15 days ago did not impair you on the night in question. It was the 7 gin and tonics. So, and
but
then
is that true?
Yeah.
It could be 7 days old.
It could be.
It could be
14,
30,
15, 30 days old, depending on the potency.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you could have trace amounts. And my wife asked.
Oh wait, you need the microphone. Sorry.
My wife asked me today, could you still be impaired 15 or 20 days later? I said, probably not, but the amounts would show that there is marijuana in your system.
Mark,
We're taking more of a libertarian point of view here from Mark's point of view, that if it's my body, let me, and that's what I was getting to. You started with legalized recreational marijuana, and you're going to start moving to legalizing the other drugs.
So you think if we start marijuana, the next is going to be cocaine? We're going to legalize cocaine.
I know that sounds foolish, but
No.
yes, I do believe that.
All right.
Just one last quick point. I mean, cocaine was legal many, many years ago, and the Republic survived. We're still all here today.
Yeah, because we made it illegal.
Right, yeah, cocaine's everywhere in this country. And the cartels are bringing it in, and there's so much gang violence as a result of the war on drugs. We
Mark, it sounds like you want to bring
spent trillions.
That's
We've spent and wasted trillions of taxpayer dollars on this failed war on drugs. But I wanted to follow up on the point to commend the General Assembly is they recently passed a law to undo what had been the law for so long, and that is if you get convicted of possession of a small amount of marijuana, for example, you automatically used to lose your driver's license for 6 months, 12 months on a second offense, 2 years on third and subsequent offenses. And thank the Republicans and the Democrats. They came together, and that was a very important improvement in the law, because individuals who are coming into contact with the law, when they lose their driver's license, they lose their ability to get to work and to provide an income for themselves and their family. And that begins a spiral that gets worse and worse and worse when you can't operate a motor vehicle because of an offense that you committed that had nothing to do with operating a motor vehicle. So that I want to commend the General Assembly on that recent law. That's going to be a big help to a lot of Pennsylvanians.
Well, talk now too about how you see. Yeah, okay, Kalpana, and then I want to find out what you see to right some of the wrongs that you. Kalpana, you were talking about restrictions that you think need to be put on.
I mean, if it is legalized or you're doing that, it affects more of the teens and the young people, which we don't want it. And as an immigrant, I personally don't want it to be affect them. And the age restriction, and as they said, like they need to use a device to measure it, and they should not drive if they're taking it.
But are you in favor of legalizing or not? Over 21 or?
Over 21.
Yes, you are. Okay.
But that also needs some restrictions too. It cannot be misused by adults also, which affects them as well as the society and the community too. And we need to educate the kids about this if it is legalized. The education camps would be more important. We need to tell them which is good, which is not good. Then that would help them to avoid it.
Is this an issue, use of marijuana in your community, as you see it amongst young people, or I mean, do you see any problem at all?
I mean, like if it is legalized, maybe some percentage will be affected, but most of the immigrants and Asian Indians, they talk to the kids, they explain the problems, and they teach them not to do. And what
And they listen.
and they listen.
Okay.
They have to
All right.
listen. Yeah.
Representative.
So you want me to respond to the social justice?
So yes, you apparently, from what you're proposing, there are some aspects that would at least forgive
Sure.
or try to help those people who've been damaged by this.
What we have in our bill is a home cultivation component, which we would allow individuals to grow up to 6 plants, 3 flowering at any one time. And our concept is whatever that weight would turn out to be would be the weight that then, if we made it legal, we would reduce or allow people's record to be expunged.
Mm-hmm.
We would allow their licenses to be returned. We're actually changing it in the bill, so any marijuana related charge would be expunged from you. We're also going to allow for if you have marijuana related charges to work in the industry, to own in the industry, because we think those folk who were criminalized by this, once we make it legal, they should be able to benefit from it as well. We also have a social component, a social justice component, where a percentage of the money will be redirected in communities that were overexposed in this war. So,
well, now stop right there for a minute, and please correct. I want to get to this. Do you feel the minority communities have been more impacted by this? That I'm hearing everybody's impacted, but from your experience, have the minorities suffered more from this criminalization of marijuana or of cannabis?
Clearly, we know the research has shown this. Most, no matter who you are, whatever community you come from, you probably engage in the same amount of utilization. But minorities, especially Black and brown individuals, are over criminalized by it, almost to the rate of 2 to 1 in some instances. And so, yes, this is, in our minds, a way to correct some of those wrongs as well. Now, there have been plenty other people who have been hit with it too, and they will certainly benefit from this. Right. So we do believe, though, a segment of our community has been over
disproportionately suffering. Brandon, you wanted to?
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the stats speak for themselves, and they mirror what the representative just said. Also, it's important to keep in mind too, and literally I had a friend who just told me this maybe about 3 days ago. Marijuana, the illegal nature of cannabis now can be used as the pretext for stopping someone. So you mentioned about you being a police officer and exercising your discretion favorably for the driver, but it's been many instances where you can merely say, we smell marijuana in the vehicle, and that can be the basis for probable cause to search a vehicle. The friend in question that I'm talking about, literally, he said that he was T-boned by a police officer. He said he did smoke. He said, I smoked probably about 4 hours ago. I was at my house. I left and I was turning out, and a police officer T-boned him. He said he got out of the car to see if the officer was okay. The officer, he called back up. They ended up arresting him, and then they tested him, took his blood, seen that it was marijuana, and then said they charged him with DUI and possession. So, and obviously if the police officer was the one culpable for the crash, now you turn the tables that this guy was intoxicated when in fact you T-boned him. So certainly, while we certainly, especially in Stilton, I'm a Stiltonian myself, we appreciate all that, especially, and then it comes from leadership as well. If your chief is on board, leadership trickles downward. So while certainly we applaud Stilton for exercising discretion in a favorable manner certainly there's been many instances where folks have said that whether or not they had marijuana in the car or not, that's been used as a pretext to further criminalize.
Well, let me ask you this. Let's stop and take the pulse. We've had a good discussion so far. We've covered a lot of areas, right? Who came in here opposed to legalizing? All right? Who is still opposed to legalizing? So we convince one, or they convince one. Who is in favor of legalizing? Okay, so that gives us a sense of where things are going, it would seem. So if indeed we're moving toward this, right? How do we do it smartly? And for that, I'm going to turn once again to the two experts. I think the detective, you're in the process of doing this. How are you moving in Steelton to make sure that you're considering all of the potential pitfalls? We worry about the children, the young children, right? We worry about the on the road. Is this one more thing we got distracted driving, we got alcohol, and now we got marijuana. Of course, you probably argue we got marijuana anyway. We just don't
It's
know
out
it,
there
right?
already.
All right, so go ahead. How are you making sure you do it right?
I don't know if it's up to me to make sure that it's done right.
You're speaking for Steelton.
I think it's up to the leaders that are in
Right.
place to regulate it and make it right. I just do what they tell me. But like I said, I do have officer discretion. We have paraphernalia now on the books as it is, and I use it quite often. So, it's all in your interaction with the people that you have.
Mhm.
So if it's contentious, sometimes there's more charges that come out of it. How do you make it better? I don't know. That's the politician's job.
So let's go over here
Well,
to.
Ms. Davis, if I can,
Yeah.
this young man is trying to get
Oh
in.
yeah. Oh sorry. Yes. Go right ahead.
I'm
Yes.
For me, I'm
yes.
sorry.
Hi, my name's Steve Bennett, and there's a burning question I have,
Yes.
and maybe the representative or the police officer both can answer this. I've heard several officials at many levels say that the cost of enforcing the existing laws don't exceed the benefits to be derived from changing the laws by 10-fold, 20-fold, 30-fold. And I'm wondering, is that being considered
Good
in
question.
changing the laws?
Good question.
We have gotten initial a figure of about $250 to $300 million potentially that could be saved from law enforcement for enforcing the small amount of possession charges and so on and so forth that could be used to do but more important policing. And so on top of giving people adults the ability to make adult decisions, it's also allowing our law enforcement to really focus in on more, crimes that matter to people. But to your point, how we can make sure we do this right, I think we're taking from other states right now, and I think what we're trying to do, and I'll give the lieutenant governor some credit. He's going around talking to citizens, hearing from them what they would like to see in the law if this was going to happen. I mean, we've been talking to the industry folk, and we've been talking to different stakeholder groups, the farmers. This is a way potentially for us to help our agricultural community. This is a way for us to, again, help even the medical patients who can't afford. Because remember, as long as this is federally illegal, it's a cash business. So you have people out here who need it as medicine, but they can't afford it. And so if we were to go to an adult use legal basis, then we could help them. We could help our veterans, some of our veterans, because they fear losing their gun permits. They don't want to go get their medical card, but they still need it. And again, if you want to fight the opioid epidemic, in states that have gone to legal, they've seen a tremendous drop in the opioid abuse and utilization, because people will choose to use cannabis versus these opioids. So I think there are a lot of benefits to it. But the first thing we have to do is be willing to talk about it. We can't hide our head in the sand. It's out here. We should talk about it as a state and what's best for Pennsylvania.
And that's what we're doing here, talking about it.
My question is, how about like jobs that say no drugs?
Mm-hmm.
So what does this mean to those places of employment that say that?
So work rules will be the work rules. It's up to the individual industries. But I will tell you, there are some industry now that's taking cannabis off of their drug list that they are testing for. But there are some industries that they won't do this because it's just it's for a liability issue, it's an insurance issue.
Well, it's the same with alcohol.
Yeah.
We can't run around here drinking alcohol all the time, right? I mean, it's
One point they keep bringing up is the economics of it. We're spending all this money on enforcement. Law enforcement officers, whatever rank you are, you don't look at the bottom line and say, well, am I getting my return for what I'm paid to do? Number one, these are people that break the law. That law must be enforced. Education begins at home. The parents should be telling these kids, don't do this. This is what can happen. When my son was growing up, he was under 21. I told him, don't you ever get caught for underage drinking because you'll pay a fine and then you'll pay when you get home. He understood that. The problem we look at is we portray everybody as victims. These are not victims. These are people who broke the law and have to be punished. If we started looking as law enforcement at the bottom line, we would start having quotas. And let me tell you something. Police officers do not want quotas because your chief can come to you, I need more speeding tickets. I need more marijuana busts. So that bottom line is
so
to me,
but I think what we're talking about here is taking the legalizing it. So taking that away, but you're still opposed if they're not breaking the law.
It's always portrayed as an economic thing. You know, even when economically we went into the minority communities, and this is where it all started. And I don't know, looking at from back in the 70s, it could have been saying, where's the major problem with this drug at? Is it in this community or this community? And they focused on where the majority of the problems were. Right or wrong, they looked at stats.
Mark, and then we'll bring it back. Mark's there, and then we'll go back on and close it out.
On the issue of regulation, I wonder if we can approach that from the perspective of how about no regulation or very little regulation. HR 50, which is the latest House bill to legalize recreational marijuana. I just looked at it today. The state will decide that that you'll have to, if you want to have a dispensary for recreational marijuana, you have to apply to the state. There will be a new state agency, a new bureaucracy created.
New jobs.
With our, well, they're government jobs.
Right, good government
we
jobs. We
taxpayers have to pay the salaries and benefits.
With
and
pensions.
Beautiful benefits. That's wonderful, but the state's bankrupt. So the state will decide whether or not you can have a license to open one of these businesses, and they've decided in their wisdom the maximum number will be 300. 300 across state. The state decides, not the market, the state. And then individuals can own plants in their home, up to 6, only 3 of which can be flowering at any given time. So do you think this is going to cause some sort of bureaucratic, regulatory, law enforcement nightmare? Do you think that it's going to cause violations of our Fourth Amendment rights if a police officer is looking in, sees 6 plants, 3 of them are flowering? I don't even know what that means. I've never even seen a marijuana plant. My God, that must be horrible to have 3 flowering. And if you do, boom, boom, boom. The door's knocked on or a search warrant's obtained, into the house you go, and you're a criminal now.
See, that's what I'm talking about. How do we do this thing right? Because what Mark is describing is really a nightmare, right? I mean, we're stepping into another thing where people are going to be arrested for the slightest little
They
thing,
do
right?
it with wine and beer already.
So
you are permitted for home use to make up to 200 gallons of beer and wine. You can't sell it to anybody. As liquor enforcement officer, we didn't kick doors in for somebody who was home brewing beer or making their own wine. It just basically, we understood there are certain people out there that do that. As long as they didn't sell it, we were fine.
I like Mark. Mark was on my good list until he just said that, because I'm the sponsor of HB 50. But in all seriousness, we put a bill out to get the conversation started. We want to start the conversation. We're not saying this is the best, but I will tell you, we don't plan to create a whole new bureaucracy. One of the things we're trying to do is have liquor control enforcement be the bureau that will enforce on cannabis. Now, we also are talking about
for the medical side and the adult use side, we need to have some oversight of those, kind of like the Liquor Control Board. So we might have another board, but the enforcement part will come from liquor control enforcement. So it'll be a matter of, hiring more liquor control officers who will have focus on cannabis. But we're not looking to go into people's homes. Right. And a matter of fact, there is a conversation if we will move from just 6 plants to maybe a space. So you might have a canopy of 10 by 10. And I don't know how, I'm not a grower myself, but these things matter to people. Our real emphasis is, let's get the conversation going. What is best for Pennsylvania? So if we're going to have a legal system, then we need to talk about what that should look like. And we do know we do have to oversee it. And we've heard citizens say, we don't want this to be a free-for-all. We want to have some way of knowing who's getting what, when, where, and how. So I think that's where we are.
Well, we have 2 final comments, and then we're going to have a conclusion.
I agree with Mark. I believe in minimal government, and the more regulations we have, the more costly that product is going to become. The more people that touch that product, the higher that price is going to go. So we're still back to the same issues. It's a plant. It should be free. It's my constitutional right for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And my concern in the judicial is it is a huge loss of revenue. It's an easy moneymaker to bust in Fairview Township. That's the #1 kind of moneymaker out there. We don't have crime. We have kids, experimenting and getting felony charges for experimenting. Not now with the decrim bills, but I find the townships being less favorable to decrim because it does tap into the revenue. So
that's a good segue. So as someone who did have a hand in drafting Harrisburg's decrim bill as well as Stilton's, your question was, how can we go about this in a prudent manner? One of the provisions, I don't know, I believe it might be in Harrisburg, but I know for certain it's in Stilton's, is it allows after a year. So it has a sunset provision. So essentially this is a pilot program, and it allows for us to, for the police department to see how many folks were charged, how many people got, how much. There's a provision in there for repeat violators. So you can actually, after that year elapses, city council as well as the mayor, as well as the chief, can look and say, okay, is this really the scourge or the floodgates that a lot of people have had fears or misgivings about, or was it the opposite? So in a year's time, we'll be able to at least assess and say, hey, nothing crazy happened, and then hopefully it'll be reauthorized as well. And conversely, if there were a lot of incidents that developed because of that, then certainly council can look and say, hey, maybe this is something that we shouldn't reauthorize. So while I get what and your name is again, sir? David mentioned about this being a slippery slope. At one point in time, interracial marriage was illegal as well too. Yeah. So, the fact that just because it was on the books or it's statutorily prohibited doesn't necessarily mean that there was any empirical data or reason for why that happened. So, and my thing is too, we talked about, I think was it you that said being a libertarian? It's about responsible usage. So, in my personal opinion, if someone can use cocaine and still be a functional human being and do what they need to do in their day-to-day life, then I say have at it.
Well, on that note,
There's a libertarian.
I want to thank you all. I thank you, first of all, for being loyal PennLive and Patriot readers. We appreciate that. And I thank you for taking time out of your schedules to come here to discuss this clearly important issue for our community, for our nation. So again, thank you. And what I'm taking away, tell me if I'm wrong, is that we seem to be headed down the path toward legalization. We want to do it smartly. We want to protect our youth, but it's about time. Is that right?
Right.
Well, thank you again.
Thank
and
you, Joyce.
Happy reading.